Waco.
Pat Smith first covered SEC Media Days back in July of 1993 in Birmingham. And he is in Nashville for the SEC Media Days, co-host of At Three Man Front with us on 365 Sports. Pat, thank you very much for your time. So, in your opinion, what has been, at least this first full day, the biggest storyline or two you've seen or heard?
So far, guys, first off, it's always a pleasure to be on with you guys. It has to be LSU. The fact that LSU last year, when we got together in Atlanta, they were picked fifth in the SEC West. And then all of a sudden, not only did they win the SEC West, but they knock off Alabama. And so now Brian Kelly, he comes in today, and most people, I think it's going to be a very close call once the vote arrives on Friday, but most people believe LSU has supplanted Alabama as the team in the SEC West. So Brian Kelly had a completely different attitude today. So with that being said, in day one of the SEC Media Days, that has been the big story.
What do you think the feeling is amongst the people about going to Dallas next year?
They're excited. You know, it was the worst kept secret. I'm sure you guys already knew about it as well. We've been talking about this even back a couple of years ago, once it became official that at some point Oklahoma and Texas was going to be in the SEC. We all knew what was going to happen. We all knew that it was ultimately going to be in Dallas to kind of, usher them into the new conference, so to speak. So once that became official this morning, we all kind of laughed and kind of shrugged our shoulders because we kind of knew it was happening. I think it's a great move. I think Commissioner Sankey, he has made it a priority to try to get around as much as he possibly can of the SEC footprint. And what a perfect way to bring those two schools into the conference by having it in Dallas.
Pat, do you think with, schools like A&M and Arkansas, had the OU Texas move not occurred, do you think Dallas would have still been a spot? It's like they're, the NFL draft. They're touring it around now, which is pretty cool. Do you think that would have happened regardless, or is this absolutely it's because OU and Texas are not joining the fray?
Well, I think it's a good time because I think Greg Sankey has wanted to do that. He's talked about, trying to move all the championships around. Now the basketball tournament's going to be here in Nashville for, I think, the next 8 or 9 seasons. They just re-upped with the football game in Atlanta. Baseball has been in Birmingham since the late 80s. So, Greg Sankey likes to put the flag in certain places. But when it comes to this event, it has just grown just like the Big 12 Media Days has at Jerry World. It's just grown because we're all tired of talking season. Like, we're still a month away from college football, but at least this is kind of the first sign that the thawing of the winter has happened and we're ready to start talking ball. And I think Commissioner Sankey understands that being able to put it in these different places, it helps the brand of the SEC. But to answer your question with a long answer, I believe that would probably still going to be in perhaps Atlanta or Birmingham if Oklahoma and Texas had not joined the league.
Pat, I just saw a couple of quotes from Jimbo Fisher and listened to as many as I could. And when he was asked about Bobby Petrino and calling plays, he seemed to kind of not brush it off. He answered the question, but seemed to still kind of be cornered or defensive. Is that the take you got too?
No doubt. Listen, we have heard this song and dance before in the SEC for many years. Obviously, me being based in Birmingham, I cover Alabama and I cover Auburn on a daily basis. And I can't tell you how many times we heard Gus Malzahn and how many times Gus Malzahn changed. I'm not calling plays. I'm bringing in an offensive coordinator. I'm bringing in Chip Lindsey, or I'm bringing in Dellingham. I'm bringing this guy in. And at the end of the day, we all knew that he was still calling plays. So until we see that Jimbo Fisher is actually not involved with that clipboard and his glasses on the end of his nose calling these plays, then we might take him, for his word. But most people just kind of roll their eyes because, Jimbo Fisher's got a $77 million buyout. He went 5-7. There is a lot of pressure. I know that's a lot of money, but in this conference, if you don't deliver, these schools have proven that they're ready to write a check. And, listen, if he gets out on the wrong foot, you could hear a little bit of the murmur here in Nashville that there's kind of that hot seat that's warming up for Jimbo. So if he doesn't bring it all together offensively, then, we'll wait to see what happens at the end of the year. But it's one of those things, we'll believe it when we see it in regards to Jimbo and the offensive coordinator play calling.
Pat, I want to rewind a little bit to what you said about LSU getting picked over Alabama. Is that the biggest reason because Alabama's quarterback situation is so unsettled and LSU's is rock solid?
Well, there's a couple things. Yes, the back end of that, no doubt about it, because with LSU, only a handful of teams in the SEC. This is probably going to be, when you talk about quarterback play in the SEC, you got to go back to probably around 2014 in regards to veteran leadership of returning quarterbacks in the league. Many people say the talent level's down this year in quarterback play. And of course, Jaden Daniels is one of those guys that's returning. So that's why they're propping LSU up. But you got to think about what happened to Alabama last year. Yeah, they lost 2 games, won a last second field goal by Tennessee, lost in overtime to LSU in Baton Rouge. But they also had to get a goal line stand against Texas A&M. They also had Bryce Young had to pull a Houdini out of his hat in Austin. Then you also had Alabama getting an interception in the end zone in Oxford against Ole Miss. So there's 3 other games that were very iffy for Alabama last year. So that's 5 total that if things would have gone another way, this Alabama team would have been 7-5. The talent is off the charts, but you don't have Bryce Young this year. So I think everybody is deferring to the fact that Jaden Daniels, the quarterback's back in play at LSU. With their talent, they have a very good defense returning. That's why I believe LSU probably on Friday may eke out an edge over Alabama when the media votes.
Yeah, and it seems like we've all been waiting on Alabama's downfall now for what seems like years, and they always kind of answer the call. But not only has LSU kind of snuck up on them, but you got the whole matter of Georgia being the back-to-back national champions. So they're kind of surrounded now for what seems like the first time in a while. Not to mention brands like Tennessee being reignited. So it's fascinating. That poll should be really interesting for sure. Pat, when it came to the opening remarks from Greg Sankey, I saw that he had various questions that popped up. One of those was on realignment. He talked about how they're just focused on the 16 right now. But did anything pop off to you or pop out to you in terms of what Sankey had to say? And when it came to expansion, is that what you think that they're going to do, is just kind of stay pat for now and see how the cookie crumbles elsewhere?
I think that's the politically correct answer when you're standing up in front of the media, and it's being beamed nationwide. I think you guys know, because you guys have done an outstanding job covering all the expansion talk as well. I think the SEC, as of today, they are happy. They're tickled to death about Oklahoma and Texas coming in the league, and we're going to be at 16 next year. But don't be fooled. We all know what drives this, and it's the money. It's the branding. And with ESPN and Disney taking over the SEC network and taking it all over next year, no more CBS, you never know when the ACC is going to crumble. I mean, that thing is being held together right now with bubblegum and a Band-Aid. So with that being said, I think the SEC is always going to be looking out 5, 6, 7 years down the road. Do I think it's going to happen the next couple of years? Not unless something drastic happens with the ACC, where you might have a Florida State or a Clemson or a North Carolina or even a Virginia be in those conversations about maybe coming to the SEC. I think they're pretty happy where they are. Get Oklahoma and Texas in and then move from there, unless something happens, Armageddon happens in the ACC.
Do you think it's funny when Greg Sankey's like, they say that I have something to say about that, like pretending like he doesn't?
Oh, it's coach speak with the commissioners, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you guys probably knew that with Bob Bowlesby and everybody else in the days. It's a situation where it really is. I mean, when you're listening to whether it's Commissioner Sankey or the coaches or the administrators, when it was at SEC spring meetings just a couple of months ago down in Destin, you just kind of roll your eyes and you just know how the game is played. As we all know, the SEC and the Big Ten are pretty much controlling everything when it comes to college football. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to get there at some point. You're going to have, the Power 5 or the 60 most powerful schools. They're going to break off and they're going to do their own thing, because despite what happened to Tennessee last week with Jeremy Pruitt and the NCAA violations, the NCAA has been neutered, and they're going to have to come up with something else because the feds aren't going to get involved. So at the end of the day, it is going to be the Big 12 and the ACCs and SEC and the Big Ten, ultimately deciding what they want to do with the 60 biggest programs in America.
By the way, Pat, last question I have for you. We had Brett Yormark on last week at Big 12 Media Days, and you may recall where Sankey kind of threw a grenade without mentioning Yormark's name about not being disruptive like somebody else or whatever,
Yes.
And yet the SEC may have also created the disruption, or at least they were a part of it. Yormark said he actually had a mutual friend, called him, picked up the phone and called Sankey, and they aired it out. I like that, don't you? That maybe you can say something, but you probably need to explain it in the fact that those two big names, especially Yormark up and coming, was able to kind of clear the air.
There's no question about that. I mean, listen, compare that to what happened with the failed alliance between Jim Phillips and Kevin Warren and Kliakoff. I mean, think about that crazy alliance that those three had, and Kevin Warren was off cutting deals left and right to stab the ACC in the back and to take two schools out of the Pac-12. So, yes, I agree with you 100%. It is nice to hear that if you have a problem with somebody, just pick up the phone and be a man, and let's discuss it and air it out. So, yes, I think that is part of the new portion of these guys that are coming in, that's CEOs of these conferences. It's a completely different, I guess, atmosphere than what it used to be, 10 or 15 years ago, where each one would go in their corners and it was kind of like the Cold War. So I'm happy to see that Yormark and Greg Sankey have that open line of communication.
Thank you very much, Pat. We appreciate what you do, and also jumping on with us from Nashville, SEC Media Days. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Pat Smith, co-host of the Three Man Front. He was one